And just like that, welcome to Defense in Focus podcast, the official podcast of the Department of Defense. I'm your host, Major Evelyn Mashiani, affectionately known as Mesh. Today, I'm delighted and very much honored to be sitting next to Rear Admiral Junior Grade Prince Tshabalala. And I'm going to say that again. I just loved how they say Tshabalala. He's the director of Defense Corporate Communications. I just got a tweak. I don't know. It must be this space. Why did I just stutter for a moment? Admiral, welcome.
Thank you, Major. It's a pleasure to be on Defense in Focus podcast.
I understand we are in your Gasi. You are a Sowetan, sir. Which one is it? Which
Actually,
one of the
my
locations?
Kasi is well known to have produced the likes of Pototo Makanya, Shakes Kwabeni,
Yes.
the Orlando Pirates
Yebo.
Stars, and it's called Dlamini.
Dlamini.
Yes,
Or
it's next to Shawela.
It's not in the Pirimat Petla thing.
Yeah,
but
obviously those were ones that are in the songs, you know.
yes.
But my one is a lesser known, but it's got big stars.
Oh, it got class.
Yeah.
All right. Admiral, let's get down to business. Let's dive into it. You are a director of corporate communications. What is the roles? What is the function? Let's just have a conversation about that.
Look, for me, communication is an important function. It's a two-way engagement where we have to constantly share information. We have a responsibility over the public to inform them about the defense force. The public also has a responsibility as a stakeholder to uphold us to account to them. As you know, that the military is a safeguard of a nation. Any nation's power is measured by the stature of its military. So this means that as a military, we are accountable to the public. So therefore, it is important, one, to understand the role of communication in accounting to the stakeholder, the taxpayer. Although the military people in the South African context, we are also taxpayers, but their accountability because we carry arms given by the mandate by the president. That means that in terms of the security agencies and the protection of citizens and the sovereignty, it is us.
So to interject you, Admiral, you spoke about stakeholders. Who are we speaking to when we speak of stakeholders? I understand we've got the communications linked together with the minister's office. Is that what the stakeholders about, or who are the stakeholders that we are referring to?
In a sense of corporate communication or public relations, as we sometimes refer to, stakeholders are broad. They are segmented according to their importance. In the context of internal stakeholder, the most higher level of the stakeholder would be the minister, obviously ultimately to the commander-in-chief. But in the context of when you move down from those levels, the internal stakeholders become our own members, serving in different levels of the organization. And those are the fundamentals now when we talk about internal communication and stakeholders. These we have to account. In the military context, we have command and control. When you have command, the importance of communication is very much crucial, because any orders that are disseminated from higher above, it means that they have to cascade down even to the lowest level of a soldier or private or airman or sailor. So all these levels, they have to have emphasis on communication. Breakdown in communication in the military context can have dire consequences.
I just love how, Admiral, you are already right into it. The terms are coming out just to show that you're really, we are in the communication space. I'd also like to know, there are gaps I'm taking you to a very sad part of a recent situation that happened, and it humbles me to speak of it with you, sir. The Democratic Republic of Congo's situation. What are the red flags or gaps that you might have identified as the South African National Defence Force in that era?
Yeah.
Can we go into that?
In my own analysis, and this is my personal view, it's not the Defence Force position. As a practitioner of communication, when we look at our doctrine, especially JP19, it spells clearly that the way we communicate in crisis communication, it has to be very, very, very urgent. If an incident happens within, let's say, 6 hours, that calls for an urgent dissemination of information immediately. The less delay might have also an impact in the capturing of information and as well in the processing of information to the public first, and as well for also accountability processes.
Yes.
Let's look at this in stages. In this incident, DRC situation, when we heard that about the first fall of a soldier, in our doctrine it says that within 24 hours, once every process and the steps has been followed in terms of from the force commander in the area of operation to the commander here in the rear, to the commander-in-chief, including all the levels, that process should take 24 hours. However, in this situation, we found ourselves having a lapse of beyond 24 hours, which for me was then moving away from our own doctrine, which governs corporate communication.
And the sense of urgency becomes lost also
then
in the process.
The process itself, the public start to have distrust in us, because then what happens? The news at this moment would have gone so viral and so fast. Remember, we have news agencies in theater of war who are operating in that space. And if they get the part and they control the narrative, including the way incident had happened, when there's a void, then they then fill up with their own perception, including assumptions, and which might not be the true
reflection
version of what had transpired.
What are those misconceptions that, Admiral, we have identified, and this platform serves at that moment to correct instantly, immediately?
Yeah.
What are those misconceptions or misinformation that we have indeed identified within that juncture?
Yeah. Look, we are dealing with electronic warfare now, which means that digital communication is faster than anything. Now, we saw the would-be enemy taking their own narrative, feeding the news agencies with misinformation.
The use of social media, of course.
Yes, deliberately so that they are in the upper hand. Within that 24-hour space, we had huge numbers, for example, of casualty from the South African. We never heard how South African fought bravely and destroyed the enemy. That was one of the examples.
Speaking of that, why is that? Why is that we are not exposing ourselves to the public to say, here we are, we were engaged in this thing, and here is where this is the casualties, number of casualties. Is it out of the pride of the country, or is it us because we would not boast about such? What is the reason?
I think there is a gap there, because we need to have a maturity as a country to say, where our soldiers have fought bravely, we do not need, we have issues of South Africa being the country that we tend to to boost ourselves, to say, we don't like to put other countries down. However, in war, it is important that we also recognize the bravery and heroism of our soldiers. Our soldiers, in this instance of Goma, Battle of Goma, I call it that way, they fought bravely, they killed hundreds of the enemy. But then the enemy, when we delayed with the time to communicate that, they then used that gap to fill up the narrative. And the narrative, when it came down, we were like defeated force. It came out to the ordinary South African. As you see, they started to use social media to spread misinformation, and they started to use propaganda against us because of the delayed communication processes that we did not follow. Should we had that information on time, we would have communicated, yes, that we had fallen soldiers, but we would have played the huge part in terms of communicating the part of the heroism displayed by our soldiers.
Which brings me to another question relating to media liaison or media management or media relations, whichever way Admiral sees it. The mainstream media, how is the relationship between the Defense Department in terms of communication and the media, mainstream media? What I understand is we get projected in a certain way, and we sometimes don't get the opportunity to have the right to reply.
Yeah.
I do not know if Admiral is with me on this one. What is your take on that?
My take is that the relationship could be improved, but it's also we have ourselves to blame. I will be very frank with that, because of delayed processes once again. If we're taking time to that, because normally some of them would have decency, because in terms of the media regulations, they have to give you the right of reply, as we indicated. Some of them, they won't. But it's because of the void that ourselves, we don't have, for example, in the battle space, do we have competent media relation officers that can be proactive and analyze to say we have agencies such as Reuters in the battlefield. When we have such other role players in the battlefield, you, even in the midst of war, it is expected for you as a military media liaison to disseminate information that is in your favor, in your position. First, you mustn't lie. But correctly so, you must disseminate information to your rear. But at the front line, you disseminate correct information to these agencies by telling them that, yes, we have engaged. Yes, we have people that have fallen, without disclosing names, of course, for security reasons.
What I like about this conversation that we're having, Admiral, is we are bold enough to take a fall, or rather a mistake. And we admit it to the public to say, we wronged you, and therefore we apologize. And in as much as there has been casualties, we now know what it is that in the next or in the future, if something of that sort is to happen, which we don't think it will happen anytime soon, but we are just saying that we saw our fault, and this platform as well will be a platform where we are able to control and give information instantly.
Yeah. Look, my strategy is very simple. My one is to have a combat camera team. When I say combat camera team, it's an embedded structure that is there to boost the force commander. It's an embedded structure that is there to advise in matters of communication per se. This structure is got a qualified media relations officer as a team leader. They've got evidence in terms of the visuals. They are able to disseminate in the front line, also at the rear. They are able to advise the force commander on the right message to communicate, and they will be timely. As I've mentioned before, that agencies are in theater of war. Now, these media agencies, as they once they see that there's a gap and a void in terms of information, they quickly change their own narrative, because it is us that didn't navigate that gap. So what I'm calling for is a competent combat camera team that is part of our doctrine, that is embodied in our force structure. Whether we are deployed internally and externally, that would be then part of what SANDF has as a capability. Now, processes itself, this team have to be fast enough that in terms of doctrine, they are able to disseminate information, and we decentralize information. We trust them enough that they are able to communicate, and they make they play a role of a multi-force advisory role to the force commander, to the contingent commander, and also to advise the troops as well. For example, we had troops seeing that there was basically no one directing them on the aspect of utilization of cell phone during a battle. We had our troops using cell phones to document whether it was for negative or positive. One cannot blame.
Policies needs to be
Policies
in place.
where it needs to be in place to regulate that. And in a real war, our troops needs to know the do's and the don'ts. And the two, we need not to be shy to communicate in the battle itself. Basically, Goma was a testimony to say all the things that we need to put in place. It's now in an emergency situation. It's no longer something that is a wish list.
And to this day, we really, for the 14 good soldiers that were buried, may their soul continue to rest in peace. But before we wrap up, shows and exhibition. What other shows are we looking forward to engaging ourselves in?
As you can see, we are podcasting now. We are moving to an era of digital age where we are going to have an online radio. We are then going to move to our own channel, whether that channel will be in the broadcast mainstream. It is immaterial. We have the internet to exploit. And we are going to use a lot of digital boards. We are going to be seizing the moment of digital transformation.
What a beautiful interview I had with you. Conversation we had. Did I just say interview? This was not an interview. This is a podcast. What a beautiful conversation I just had with you, R Admiral. What do they call you, just by the way, before we wrap up?
Well, pizza shakes.
Oh, shakes! Fresh shakes. There you have it with me and the Admiral Tshabalala. Thank you so much. Until we meet in the next episode, from myself, Major Evelyn Mashiani, it's a wrap.